Hello, welcome back to another webinar from AuctionMethod. My name is Daniel West. I'm one of the co-founders of AuctionMethod. About once a month, we try to put together one of these webinars on a subject matter that is pressing for our customers. And this month, we're going to be talking about auction flow. It turns out that reducing stress in an auction starts by reducing the chaos that comes with all of the different phases of an auction. And it's really important to reduce that stress and minimize that chaos by using strategic scheduling. And that's what we're talking about today, the flow, the way that an entire auction process flows. So let's just jump right into it. Mhm. All right. So the main point here is that problems will stack throughout the entire auction process. So what starts off as just like a minor problem over time becomes bigger and bigger and bigger until at the end of the auction during the the period, it can be really hectic and crazy in a way that it doesn't have to be. If just we put a little bit of thought and planning in ahead of time, then it would be much easier to maintain a smooth flow all the way through to the very, very end. And so, the main point here from the slide, as you can see, is that the scheduling is the cause of most of the chaos or the lack of scheduling. So, we're going to just jump right into it now. By the way, this slide deck that we're looking at here, I put together at the very last minute. My bad. I did not I did not manage my own schedule all that well. So if it's a little bit off or anything, I apologize. That's my fault. But anyway, what we're talking about here is a controlled sequence of energy, right? That's what we mean by an auction flow. And so one of the cool things about timed online auctions is that it's going to create these predictable spikes in attention and in need from your customers, from your bidders. And so it's not just about speed, trying to get through everything, right? It's about controlling how the demand meets up with your resources, right? With your team, so that you don't want to get the whole system bogged down where the demand is greater than the resources that you have. That's where this planning comes in. The known spikes, there's these are the ones that are most common is the very first spike, of course, comes during the preview period, when the inspections are available, when people can come in person. In most cases, can come in person and preview what they intend to purchase. But in some cases, preview might be entirely online only. That's a decision that has to be made. But the pre-auction inspection period is when one of these spikes in demand will arise. There's also a spike that happens, as everybody knows, on the very last day of bidding. It's kind of regardless of how long your bidding period is, the real auction happens in the last few minutes of each item, right? As each item closes, that's when a flurry of activity happens. The good news is that if you're using a reliable software platform like AuctionMethod software platform, then you don't have to concern yourself too much about the spike in traffic. The software and the support infrastructure, or rather the infrastructure supporting it, is designed to handle these spikes reliably. So you don't have to worry about that. But you should know that last minute bidding also does spike an increase in phone calls and emails. People just have questions, they're panicking, they're excited. And so you want to make sure that during the closing period that you have staff on deck in order to help bidders. A lot of times what happens is people will show like they'll pay attention to the auction and forget to register. And then they'll register just a few minutes before, the item that they're interested in is about to close. And if they encounter any kind of slowdown there or need any kind of help, it'd be great if they could reach out to you and get immediate assistance so that they can get right in there and start bidding. Once the auction is over, there's the invoicing and payment spike. Um, Again, with good, reliable software, that the actual demand on the invoicing system or the payment system is not a big deal because the software is handling that. But again, during the invoicing and payment period, you're going to have a spike in questions. People who need special attention, people who have unique situations that they need to discuss. Um, you should just know that again, during the payment period, you want to make sure that you have adequate staff on site in order to answer any questions. And then, of course, pickup day, right? When people come to come to get their stuff that they bought, there's a surge that happens there as well. That is the primary physical surge that actually happens as part of a timed online auction process. So I think it's really important to be aware of the different phases in an auction. So we're just going to go over these very briefly. I really just want you to pay attention to the fact that there are these phases. You should know that they exist so that when you're doing your planning, when you're doing your scheduling, you are taking into account the complete picture, all of the phases. So let's just go through them, okay? So the intake and asset readiness, that just means, getting the assets for sale, making sure that the consignor contracts are signed up, are properly signed, you know who the consignors are, all of that. And then, of course, you have the cataloging process where you got to go take the pictures and get the condition of the items and describe them in great detail and get that data inputted into the system. Then, of course, you have the marketing push. So, uh, the advertising promotion of the auction is a critical phase that you really should be paying attention to for sure. Then, as we were talking about earlier, you have the preview and the inspection period. And then there's the how you design the bidding window when bidding starts and when bidding ends. Now, we've talked about ideal timing strategies in the past. So if you really want to get into sort of the ideal structure and timing of an auction, check out a previous webinar. I think we also have some ebooks at auctionmethod.com that cover that. Um, and it goes pretty deep into the theory behind how you structure these things. One of the biggest problems that we see is people having auctioneers scheduling really long bidding windows, which is a bad idea. But that's not what we're talking about today. You should just know that the bidding window is an important phase. And then, of course, there's when the auction is closing, right? So this is, it's not over yet, but it is in the process of closing. Some items have ended, others are ending, right? And others are about to end. That's an important, critical phase, and the one where we usually see a real high spike on the software end of things in traffic, that is. So then you have invoicing and payment. That's that window, that phase of the auction. We recommend typically having that firmly locked down before the removal and pickup period, which is incidentally the eighth phase of an auction. Then you have the consignor settlement and reporting, and most auctioneers stop right there, right? They are like, man, once you settled up with the consigners, you got all your reports in, there's nothing left to do. Um, did I say the removal and pickup? Removal and pickup. That's another phase. But anyway, the point is that most auctioneers will just stop at number 9 here. But it would be good, beneficial to you for future auctions if after every major auction that you have, you do an analysis of what worked and what didn't work. That way you can get feedback from your team who are, on the ground working with people and then and figure out a strategy for the next time that you are creating an auction. And that leads to this continuous improvement cycle. And I'd say that the majority of auctioneers totally skip that step, but they do so, you know, um, if not performing a postmortem analysis of an auction, I think is a critical mistake. It's important to bring the whole team together, have a meeting, right? An in-person meeting, hopefully, maybe a Zoom session, where you just spend 15, 20 minutes talking about what worked and what didn't work. That'll be super helpful. So we talked about the different phases, but some of these phases are sort of ripe for becoming bottlenecks in your flow. So let's talk about each one of these step by step. So you can see that there's like the title here, and then there's like an arrow, meaning one thing comes before the next thing comes. Okay. So first things first, the catalog lock proceeds marketing. What that means is that your auction catalog, all of the items that you're selling, the pictures and descriptions and condition reports, all of that stuff should be super stable, as complete as it possibly can be before you start promoting the sale. If you start promoting the sale before your catalog is complete, you're going to have a lot of confused buyers. You're going to have spend a lot of money promoting an auction where people arrive, they don't see what they should be seeing. And it causes a lot of unnecessary uncertainty for the bidders. Everyone's excited to start promoting the auction, but wait until your catalog is complete before you start promoting the auction. It's not to say that you can't make minor changes to the catalog or add a couple of items here or there. That part is okay, um, as long as you use some discretion. But the majority of the catalog, certainly the majority of the high value items, should be in the system and ready to go before you spend any amount of time or energy promoting that auction. So then the next aspect of it is the preview period, right? And so what you really want to do is make sure that the preview period, whether it's an online only preview period or an in-person preview period, hopefully it's in person. That's what most people want. Even if they don't all attend it, it is super helpful. But you want to make sure that that preview period is close to the closing time of the auction, not necessarily the opening, right? You could start that depending on how long you're going to have a preview period. Um, if you're just going to have like a 1 day preview, then fine. Have it scheduled right like on the day that the bidding period begins. You want to get preview as close to the closing period as possible, but not on the closing day, right? So let's say you have a 3 day bidding window. If you have the preview period scheduled on the day that the auction opens, then people can immediately begin engaging. They can come to your preview and they can start bidding on their phones while they're there. Um, you don't want to schedule the preview way before the bidding period opens. You'll miss a critical number of buyers who are showing up at the last minute. And also, like I said, you want bidders to be able to engage with your auction right away. So then, the closing cadence of an auction is important. It says here close before invoicing. That's not really entirely what I'm after here. It's not really what I'm talking about. The closing cadence has to do with how long the closing period lasts and how quickly you move through the items. This can be a major bottleneck with some pretty serious repercussions. If you if you end up, let's say you have 1,000 items and you close them 1 minute apart. That's a very, very, very long auction. And you don't just risk bidder fatigue, it is guaranteed. Bidders are going to lose interest. They can't stay for the whole thing and pay attention. Also, it's slower, right? And so sitting there looking at one item after the other closing, people are going to bounce for a little while and then they might miss out on some opportunities to bid. So the way that you structure the cadence of the closing period is really, really important. If you have a lot of items, then you want to shorten the staggering. So maybe put maybe like 30 seconds in between each item and or group your items in a closing. So if your software allows for it, which AuctionMethod does, you can group items to close so many lots per time period or per increment. So you could say close, like let's say you wanted to have a really fast auction, which is actually recommended, right? You want to build urgency and you want to have some speed during this closing period. Don't go slow. Then maybe set it up so that four lots are closing every 30 seconds. That's a nice fast auction. Nobody's going to lose interest at that rate. The last bottleneck that we run into is payment and pickup. It's quite important that you you think about this and make it so that the payment period is completed, or at least almost completed, before the pickup period begins. So one of the reasons for this is that you don't want to have buyers show up for the pickup period when some of the lots or some of the invoices remain uncollected, some other buyers remain uncollected. Because there's going to be a chance, a pretty decent chance, that you're going to have some stuff that didn't sell, where you're unable to collect for whatever reason. And so if you wait until buyers have already shown up and picked up, then those guys are out. They're not going to bid on your follow-up auction. But if you structure it so that the payment period is clearly over before the pickup period begins, it gives you an opportunity then to list all of the unpaid items in a quick follow-up auction. And if you do this right, then your follow-up auction can actually yield better results, right? The second time around, because you have a certain number of buyers who are committed to coming and picking up already. Those same buyers now know how much money they got to play with. It's all there, it's clear to them. So they can go back in, oh, bid on some of those items. I didn't bid on it the first time because I wasn't sure, but now I know I'm coming. I know I have a little bit of money. What a great opportunity to place some more bids. So this is just a concept of a handoff contract. And so all it means is that you have a good definition of what each one of these phases or stages is and what it looks like when it's done. So don't hand off, don't move on to the next phase until the first phase is clearly completed. So the example here is you can't start the preview period until all of the photos are accounted for. Like you have the minimum number of photos, which if you don't have at least four or five pictures of what you're selling, why are you even bothering? If you're just, I'm sorry if this is breaking your heart, but if you are the kind of auctioneer who just puts one picture of the item that they're selling up, you're not doing your job. That's all I can say. You should also be doing videos, but that's a it's harder for people to do that. But anyway, the photos really should be meeting your standards. You should have a high amount of photos, good quality that shows everything that can possibly be seen about the items that are being picked up. Also, you want to have very clear condition notes for the high value lots or high risk lots. I'd say it's more like the high value lots. So, if you know that there's something wrong with an item or that you have some concern, whether it's a scratch, a dent, or a weird sound, right? You can't hear a motor running through a picture. And so if you notice that something is going on that a buyer might be might want to know, that should be included, right? So you have already taken note before the preview period. You know before anybody else does what's wrong with the stuff you're selling. And you can't start the preview period until you've gone all the way through the schedule. All the way through. The whole thing is the plan of attack, the schedule of events, these phases that we're talking about. They've all been figured out, they're all accounted for, and you know what you're doing. At that point, you can start the preview period. That's just an example of a handoff contract. But every company is going to have their own handoff contracts, but it's a good idea to actually document this. Their, policies and procedures. Then you can share that with your team, and then it's very easy for you to know whether you can safely move on and maintain a good working flow without any blockage. So the majority of auctions nowadays are happening online. Most of them are timed online only auctions. Of course, live auctions are still a thing, and simulcast auctions where bidders are online and in person are a thing as well. They have the same needs for controlling the workflow, but one of the things that's kind of nice about timed online auctions is because it creates this nice structure, because you are capable of creating this nice structure, you can essentially line up many, many, many events or auctions, kind of like dominoes, right? And then you can handle more. You can do more with less time, fewer resources. So in a timed online auction, um, this some of the roles that used to be managed by the auctioneer are now managed by the schedule, the software settings. Um, and so paying attention to those settings and being deliberate about how you use them, that's the role of the auctioneer. So if you call yourself an auctioneer, you should be well aware of what all the settings are and what the schedule is. And if you do that, then you can call yourself an auctioneer, even if you're selling by timed online auction. The soft close feature is also known as extended bidding, and this is where the time left on any particular item will be extended, or even a group of items will be extended if there's a lot of bidding activity towards the end of the auction. There are different rules you can, at least within the AuctionMethod software platform, there are different rules that you can set up related to soft close about when it happens, how it happens, all of that. But this having the soft close is almost every timed online auction platform now focuses on those soft close because the proof is pretty undeniable that they generate a higher value than what are known as hard close, which are the classic timed auctions where the auction ends when it ends and there's nothing left that nobody can do anything about it if they didn't get their bids in. Those are exciting. They're a lot of fun. I love them. Bidders love them, but it does leave money on the table. So probably you want to use the soft close settings. And as we already talked about, the staggering, right? You know, you want to spread some of it out, right? You don't want to have everything close all at exactly the same time, but you got to maintain that cadence, that rhythm, the closing rhythm, and you want it to be pretty fast. So your staggering should be set up to keep the bidders engaged, active, and interested in the closing period. Okay, so we're jumping a little bit forward now into the last phase of the auction, actually, which is the pickup period. If you're doing shipping, then you're going to have your phase is going to be look a little bit different. If you're doing shipping only exclusively, it's going to look quite a bit different. But the majority of auctioneers are still doing in-person pickup handoffs. And so I think this is one of those things where you really got to think about the process because uh, there's a way of making it so that you're not overloading your system physically. And when I say system, I mean your staff, right? Your way of doing things. It's easy to overload them during the pickup process. And so there's this thing known as Little's Law. Basically, I don't know where it comes from, but the idea is that you can sort of average out the throughput. Like, what does it look like? How many buyers can possibly show up at any given time and maintain an acceptable level of performance where the wait time is not 3 hours, but maybe 5, 10 minutes at the most. And so you have to figure that out yourself, depending on your resources and what's available to you. Um, but thinking about what you're capable of serving during the pickup process is really important. If you just have it open-ended, you just say, everybody just come whenever you feel like it, we'll help you out. You're gonna get chaos. And if you're okay with that, fine. But part of the reason you're here probably is to reduce some of that chaos. So think about the pickup process. And this isn't, one of the things actually that I have seen, and that's why it's in the notes here, is that auctioneers will get mad at their staff because the auctioneer failed. If you're getting mad at your staff because they can't handle the pickup period, it is not your staff's fault. It's yours. Okay? Hard truth. So pay attention to this stuff. It's really, really important. So how do you control this? You don't control it. Well, you do control it by controlling when people arrive. And so there's a few different ways that you can handle this. AuctionMethod has a pickup appointments scheduling system, which is pretty nice. So you can set time periods and you can create little slots, how many bidders can show up during each slot. And then people can schedule their when they're going to pick up. That's an awesome system as long as you're willing and able to enforce it. So one of the problems with buyers is that they want to show up when they want to show up, and they don't want to be pinned down to a particular day and time. So you have to balance their desire with your own needs. But if you're able to make it very clear that only those who have who show up during their appointment are going to get top level high performance, then you can still accommodate the losers who are not willing or able to maintain their appointments, but they are the ones who suffer because they are at the back of the line and will be dealt with whenever they get dealt with. So appointment scheduling system, if you're not using it, think about using it. It should be pretty easy for you to turn on. Send a message to support if you need any help with that. Um, so, you can also do these pickup waves, basically where, you essentially say so many, there's like a specific time period here, and we're going to allow in, so many people per wave. And you could express that. You could put that into your terms and conditions, into the removal section of your terms and conditions about how many people will be allowed in at any given time and the rules governing, who's allowed in to these pickup waves. You can also, depending on what type of assets you're selling and what the situation is, you can create these different lanes. So if somebody just bought a hammer, they shouldn't have to wait for somebody who bought pallet racks and a bunch of stuff on the pallet racks, right? Like if you split it up, easy to deal with, just a couple of easy items, and then the, heavy loads or the more complex, like people who need to do rigging and that kind of thing. Split them into these two different lanes with dedicated resources for each one of them. That can be pretty helpful. So I thought I'd put together um, these, a couple of blueprints. These are not hard set in stone blueprints. This is just like a basic idea um, of how you might structure or how you might think about the structure of your flow. And so here we have, a situation where you have multiple locations. In this case, we're going to assume 1,200 lots, and that you have to get out 5 days after the auction's over, and you have 8 people working for you. So something like this might work, right? Where you first you always work backwards from when you have to get out. So you set, there's the drop dead date, the vacate date, and then you work backwards from there for all the other phases. And so doing this type of planning will help you a lot, where you really stop to think about like, okay, so we know when we're going to get out. when we have to be out by. We know, when we have to have contracts signed by. We need to, when all of the like the auction itself is sort of like locked down, then and how when you have access to the locations. And then of course you have the lotting and tagging, what we call the cataloging process. Both the, taking the pictures and putting the tags on things, but then, also the data entry, building the catalog online and doing your quality control. Yeah, and you can see the rest of the flow here, right? It is a little bit interesting. You can see that I put marketing release before catalog lock here, which this is one of those things that you have to have some kind of discretion around when you do each of these things, right? If earlier I said, you want to have the catalog locked down before the marketing release. That's ideal. It's not always possible. And so what you can do is a soft release, meaning you go ahead and publish the auction, maybe even put it in your newsletter, but you don't begin the main thrust, like all your paid advertising and stuff doesn't begin until the actual catalog is locked down. And then yeah, you can see how the rest of this is structured all the way through to that really critical last phase of the post-mortem. Right? Don't forget to do that part. So I set up another blueprint here. This one is different. This one is based upon an estate liquidation where you have some limited access to the property, which is pretty common, right? You have weekend only access. You only have 5 staff members and you've got about 600 lots to catalog. So again, you want to go to like what's the drop dead date and work backwards. That's almost always the case. But you can see that it's, because this is a different type of auction, the way that you're going to structure the flow is going to be based upon that, right? What's known about this auction. So, one of the things you'll see here at the end is this contingency, right? If you lose access, then you might not be able to do your preview period. So you need to have a backup plan. If you know that access to the property is a potential issue, then take that into account and have a plan. What happens if we can't get in for preview? Well, then we're going to have an online only preview, and this is how we're going to handle that. So, um, yeah. I'm not going to read through the whole thing. I just wanted to give you an example where you can like look at and think about how you yourself should be structuring your flow. Okay, some basic principles. So I already said this, and I'm going to say it ad nauseum. You always kind of work backwards from, when you need to be out or when the drop dead date is. Almost every auction has them because they're always time sensitive. And so, working from the time deadline, working backwards from there is really, really, important. And so you work all the way back to, when's the pickup, when's that gonna happen? Then you go all the way back based upon like what we were looking before. How many days are you gonna need for each phase? And that'll lead you to, the start, when do you actually have to start the intake process? The other thing is one of the things that biggest problems I see with auctioneers is they try to do everything all at once. And that can get really messy. It leads to additional chaos. There's less control over the flow. And so what I mean by that is if you blend like client intake and cataloging, you show up and you're getting them to sign their agreement and you're just going to immediately go out and start lotting and tagging, right? That's like a little bit too much too fast, right? It's not structured enough. You should have each one of them delineated and have an understanding about why you're doing one thing first and then the next thing next, right? Another example of tasks that sometimes get commingled are pickup and payment. I'm not saying that you can't do pickup and payment together. That's fine. Like it's your business, your rules, right? It's your flow. But like I was mentioning earlier, if you do that, you're going to lose out on the opportunity for follow-up auctions that actually work and deliver high prices. So just please try as much as you can to delineate the phases and give each thing, each task, its own dedicated time block. So auction method software, and probably any good auction platform out there, is already designed to handle peak loads of traffic, website traffic. You shouldn't ever experience a slowdown or anything as a result of too many people coming on all at once. We actually want that, and we should be prepared for that. But your staff should be accounted for. So know, recognize when those peak periods happen, right? When we had broken it down into four different periods. Know that they're happening and know that you need to have people on staff to help during those times. And one of the things that I've seen sometimes is an auction company will set the ending period for an auction, say at like 7 p.m., but it's a 400 lot auction with 1 minute staggered closings. So they let their staff go home at like 7:30 or 8, uh, but the auction is still going. So account for the entire closing period and making sure that you have people who are available to answer the phone and respond to emails quickly during these peak load periods. The other thing is, and this is really something that I try to drive home to all of our clients, you really want to standardize everything. So don't, you don't want to recreate the entire process again and again and again. You want to dial it in, get yourself sort of a template of how you do things, knowing that you need to modify it to meet certain conditions. But if you create templates, then you're not always second guessing. There's consistency, there's clarity, and it's much easier for you to make tweaks along the line. So like you do your postmortem analysis, you realize that there's some room for improvement, go and improve your template then, and then the next time you have an auction, then you're already sort of lined up to do it right. And by templates, I don't just mean within the software system, right? I also mean your own scheduling template, how you organize yourself through these different phases of the auction. And how would you know if there's problems with your auction flow? Here's some of the warning signs. So if you see a lot of chargebacks, then either you're dealing with fraud or you're dealing with unhappy buyers, buyers who had a disagreeable experience almost always because they weren't communicated with properly. They didn't actually understand what was going on. They didn't receive their item when they were supposed to receive it because somebody didn't make it clear to them which phase they were in and when the time deadlines were. Or you messed up in terms of describing the asset, right? You didn't do your condition reporting, uh, or you didn't take enough pictures, and so people, they end up getting their product or whatever it is that they bought, and they're disappointed, and they say, "Well, I didn't really get to come to the preview period because it was after I found out about the auction, or I didn't get to pick up my item because I showed up and there were 100 other people in front of me, and you didn't account for that." So, chargebacks are not always just about fraud. If you see a lot of chargebacks coming through, that means your buyers are unhappy. If you have a lot of chaos during the pickup day, like it says here, long lines and confusion and frustration, unresolved invoices, that's because your auction flow is messed up. If you're not getting payouts out to consigners on time, that's a clear, very clear sign that your flow is broken. And if your staff is upset with you and burnt out, then that's likely because instead of improving your flow, you're leaning on them. Uh, and again, it's your job to control the flow, not theirs. Alrighty, there we go. We'll end on a pretty little picture of a waterfall flowing there. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the share, and I'm going to see if we have any questions in the Q&A section. Ah, look at that. Just like one of my mentors said, if there's no questions, it must mean that you understood everything and you agree with everything that I said. And that's fantastic. That's wonderful. That means my job's done. I don't see any questions outstanding. So with that, the webinar itself is over. I do encourage you to, if you enjoy this webinar, check out auctionmethod.com. There's a resources tab there that has previous webinar recordings. We have ebooks. We have how-to videos. We're trying to help as much as we can to support you in your auction process. If you're an Auction Method customer, you can drop into our twice a week training sessions, co-working sessions, actually, we should call them, where we have an hour and a half on Wednesdays and Thursdays where you can just drop in and get help with the software and talk about anything actually that's on your mind, hopefully related to auctions, but that's fine. It's a nice little community that shows up for those. Um, all right, that's it. I hope everybody has a lovely weekend, and I will see you next month for next webinar. If you have any suggestions for topics, feel free to email them to me at daniel@auctionmethod.com. And if you're on LinkedIn, follow me on LinkedIn because I'm always sharing stuff there. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.